The dream takes flight. Setting the stage. You've set down your phone at last. One final email answered, one more crisis managed, another day of building something from nothing finally drawing to a close. The weight you carry feels familiar now, doesn't it? That persistent hum of responsibility, the endless calculations running beneath every conversation, every decision. But tonight, I want to take you somewhere else, entirely, to a story of three men who understood that weight, who carried their own impossible dreams across the frozen top of the world. Picture, if you will, the spring of 1926. The Great War has been over for nearly 8 years, yet the world still feels fragile, still rebuilding. In drawing rooms across Europe and America, men speak in hushed tones of new possibilities, of flying machines that can cross oceans, of wireless signals that leap continents, of boundaries that exist only to be crossed. It is an age when the impossible feels suddenly, tantalizingly within reach. And in Rome, on a military airfield outside the Eternal City, something extraordinary takes shape. Not a machine of war, but of wonder. The airship Norge stretches across the tarmac like a silver whale, her envelope gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. She is 348 feet of controlled ambition, a marriage of Italian engineering and Norwegian determination designed for one purpose that has never been achieved: to fly over the North Pole and live to tell the tale. Three men have staked everything on this moment: their reputations, their fortunes, their very lives. Each carries his own invisible weight, his own reasons for believing that what they're building together might change the world. The first is Roald Amundsen. Perhaps you know the name. By 1926, he is already legend. The man who reached the South Pole first, who navigated the Northwest Passage, who has spent his life pushing into the white spaces on maps where cartographers simply wrote "unknown." But legends, you see, are heavy things to carry. At 53, Amundsen feels time pressing against him like pack ice. The world has fewer mysteries than it once did, fewer places where a man might write his name in history. The North Pole by air represents something precious, one last first, one final chance to do what has never been done. Yet Amundsen carries more than ambition. He carries debt, crushing, persistent debt from previous expeditions that promised glory but delivered bills. Creditors circle like Arctic wolves. His reputation may be golden, but his bank account tells a different story entirely. This expedition isn't just about legacy. It's about survival, in the most practical sense. Success means vindication, means proving that the old explorer still has one more impossible thing in him. Failure means obscurity, poverty, the slow fade of a man who outlived his usefulness to a world that has moved on. Standing beside him is Lincoln Ellsworth, and here we find a different kind of weight entirely. Ellsworth is American money, old money, the kind that opens doors and builds dreams. His father struck it rich in coal, and Lincoln has spent his 46 years trying to prove he's more than just a wealthy man's son. Where Amundsen carries the weight of expectation, Ellsworth carries something perhaps heavier: the weight of trying to earn a place at the table of great men. He has funded expeditions before, always hoping to transform money into meaning. But this feels different. The Norge represents his chance to be more than a checkbook with legs, more than the man who pays while others do. He has learned to navigate, to read the ice, to endure the cold that turns breath to crystal, and makes every heartbeat feel like an act of defiance. Yet still, in quiet moments, He wonders if the others see him as a true explorer, or simply as the man who makes exploration possible. It's a question that follows him across continents, a doubt that no amount of money can quite silence. And then there is Umberto Nobile, Colonel Noble of the Italian Air Force, the man who designed the Norge herself. If Amundsen carries the weight of legend, and Ellsworth the weight of proving himself worthy, then Noble carries perhaps the heaviest burden of all. The weight of knowing that everything depends on what he has built. Every rivet, every seam, every calculation that went into the Norge's construction lives in Nobile's mind like a prayer. He is a small man, precise and intense, with the kind of attention to detail that borders on obsession. It has to border on obsession. When you're building something meant to carry human lives across 200 miles of the most hostile environment on Earth, there is no room for approximation, no space for good enough. But Nobile's weight isn't just technical, it's political. Italy is a young nation, hungry for respect on the world stage. Mussolini himself has blessed this expedition, seeing in it a chance to plant the Italian flag at the top of the world. The pressure is immense, the expectations crushing. Success means glory, not just for Nobile, but for his country. Failure means carrying the blame for a national humiliation, for dreams dashed against the ice. What drives men to risk everything on the impossible? Perhaps it's the same thing that drives you. That restless certainty that what exists isn't enough, that what has been done before isn't the limit of what can be done. These three men, standing on that Roman airfield in the spring of 1926, understand something that you understand too, that the greatest achievements require the greatest risks, that building something meaningful means accepting the possibility of losing everything. The Norge herself seems to embody this paradox. She is simultaneously magnificent and fragile, a triumph of engineering that depends entirely on the cooperation of wind and weather, and 1,000 mechanical systems that must work in perfect harmony. Her envelope contains 670,000 cubic feet of hydrogen, the lightest gas known to man, but also one of the most dangerous. One spark, one moment of carelessness, and the dream becomes a fireball. Yet there is something beautiful in her very existence, something that speaks to the audacity of human ambition. She represents the marriage of science and courage, of careful calculation and wild hope. Looking at her, you can almost believe that anything is possible, that the barriers we accept as permanent are simply challenges waiting for the right combination of vision and determination. The crew that will take her north numbers 16 men, Norwegians and Italians working together despite speaking different languages, despite coming from different worlds. They are united by something more fundamental than nationality, the shared understanding that they are about to attempt something that has never been done, something that may never be attempted again. The plan itself is breathtaking in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. They will fly from Rome to the Norwegian archipelago of Spitsbergen, then launch across the Arctic Ocean toward the North Pole. If all goes well, if the weather holds, if the engines don't fail, if the envelope doesn't tear, if 100 other variables align, they will continue past the pole to Alaska, completing the first transpolar flight in history. But the Arctic forgives no mistakes. It is a place where small errors become catastrophes, where mechanical failure doesn't mean inconvenience, but death. The men aboard the Norge know this. They have studied the accounts of previous attempts, read the stories of expeditions that vanished without trace into the white silence. Yet still, they prepare to go, driven by something stronger than fear, the conviction that some things are worth any risk. As the final preparations continue through those last days in Rome, Each man carries his private thoughts, his personal reckonings with what lies ahead. They check and double-check equipment, study weather reports, rehearse emergency procedures. But underneath all the technical preparation runs a deeper current. The knowledge that they are about to stake everything on a dream that exists only in their shared imagination. The Norge sits ready, her envelope taut with hydrogen, her engines tested and tuned. The route has been plotted, the supplies loaded, the crew briefed on every contingency they can imagine. What they cannot imagine, what no amount of preparation can account for, is what the Arctic itself will decide about their chances. And so, as spring settles over Rome and the preparations reach their final stages, three men who understand the weight of impossible dreams make ready to lift that weight into the sky, to carry it across the roof of the world toward a destiny that waits somewhere beyond the horizon, in the white silence where maps end and legends begin. The Norge strains gently against her moorings, as if she too feels the pull of the unknown, the irresistible attraction of the impossible made manifest in aluminum and fabric, and the dreams of men who refuse to accept that anything is beyond reach. Northward bound, the journey begins. On the morning of April 10, 1926, as Rome awakens to the gentle warmth of spring, the Norge lifts into the Italian sky with the deliberate grace of something born to fly. You can imagine the moment. The ground crew releasing their hold, the great silver envelope rising against the Mediterranean blue, carrying within its gondola three men whose dreams have finally taken physical form. The journey northward is no simple matter. In 1926, crossing Europe by air remains an act of faith as much as navigation. The Norge follows ancient trade routes that once carried Roman legions and medieval merchants, but now traces them through an element that still feels foreign to human ambition. Each mile northward brings cooler air, different winds, the gradual transformation from the familiar warmth of civilization to the stark promise of the Arctic. Roald Amundsen stands in the forward observation post, his weathered hands gripping the rail with the unconscious balance of a man who has spent decades reading the subtle language of ice and wind. At 53, he carries the accumulated weight of a lifetime spent pushing against the edges of the known world. His eyes, pale as Arctic ice, scan the landscape below with the methodical attention of someone who understands that survival depends on noticing what others miss. There is something almost monastic about Amundsen's presence aboard the Norge, a quality of complete focus that comes from years of reducing existence to its essential elements. He has learned, through bitter experience in the Antarctic and the Northwest Passage, that success in impossible endeavors requires a kind of spiritual discipline. Every decision must be weighed against survival. Every comfort must be questioned. Every assumption must be tested against the unforgiving reality of environments that care nothing for human ambition. Lincoln Ellsworth moves through the gondola with a different energy entirely. His wealth has given him access to this adventure, but it has not insulated him from the very real dangers they face. There is something touching about his determination. A man who could live comfortably in New York drawing rooms, choosing instead to risk everything for a chance to write his name across the top of the world. You understand this impulse, perhaps, the way success in one realm can leave you hungry for challenges that cannot be bought or negotiated. Ellsworth carries the particular burden of the wealthy adventurer, the need to prove that his contributions extend beyond financial backing, that he belongs among these men not because of what he owns, but because of what he's willing to risk. Umberto Nobile represents something different again, the pure technical genius whose vision has made this entire enterprise possible. His relationship with the Norge is almost paternal. He knows every rivet, every cable, every subtle variation in the engine's rhythm. When the wind shifts or the altitude changes, he feels it in his bones before the instruments register the difference. There is an intensity to Nobile that comes from understanding exactly how many things must go right for them to survive. The Norge is a masterpiece of engineering, but she is also a collection of thousands of components, each one capable of failure. The gas cells that provide lift, the engines that provide thrust, the control surfaces that provide direction, all must function perfectly in conditions they were never designed to face. As they cross the Alps, the temperature begins its relentless descent. The landscape below transforms from the green abundance of spring to something starker, more elemental. Snow appears first in patches, then spreads until it covers everything in a white uniformity that hints at what awaits them further north. The crew works with the quiet efficiency of men who understand their interdependence. In the engine cars, mechanics monitor the rhythm of pistons and the flow of fuel with religious attention. In the control cabin, navigators plot their course using instruments that represent the cutting edge of 1920s technology, yet seem impossibly primitive by today's standards. There is something beautiful about their reliance on pure skill and judgment, the way they must read weather patterns in cloud formations, estimate wind speed from the behavior of smoke below, calculate their position using celestial observations that require perfect timing and steady hands. Every mile northward is earned through human expertise applied with mathematical precision. The Norge herself responds to their care with the reliability of a machine built by craftsmen who understood that lives would depend on their work. Her engines maintain their steady rhythm. Her gas cells hold their pressure. Her control surfaces respond to the helmsman's touch with the sensitivity of a living thing. But beneath the technical mastery, tensions begin to emerge. Three strong personalities, each accustomed to command, must somehow share authority in a space smaller than most modern offices. Amundsen's experience gives him natural leadership, but Ellsworth's financing provides ultimate authority, while Nobile's technical expertise makes him indispensable. It is a delicate balance, and the stress of the journey ahead will test every assumption about how decisions should be made. They pass over Germany, where the scars of the Great War still mark the landscape. Broken cities slowly rebuilding. Forests marked by shell holes that are only now beginning to heal. There is something sobering about viewing this evidence of human conflict from the peaceful silence of the Norge's gondola. Their mission represents a different kind of human ambition, the drive to explore rather than conquer, to discover rather than destroy. The weather grows more challenging as they move north. Spring comes late to Scandinavia, and the winds carry the sharp edge of Arctic air. The Norge rides these currents like a ship navigating invisible seas, rising and falling with the thermal columns, adjusting course to account for crosswinds that could push them hundreds of miles off their intended path. Nobile monitors every aspect of the airship's performance with the attention of a physician reading vital signs: gas pressure, engine temperature, control surface response. Each measurement tells part of the story of how well the Norge is adapting to conditions that will only grow more severe. There is no room for mechanical failure where they are going, no possibility of emergency landing, no rescue if something goes catastrophically wrong. As they cross into Norway, the landscape below takes on the stark beauty that has shaped the Norwegian character for centuries. Fjords cut deep into ancient granite. Mountains rise in serrated ridges that catch and hold the snow. Forests of pine and spruce stretch to horizons that seem impossibly distant. This is Amundsen's homeland, and you can see in his posture a subtle relaxation, the comfort of a man returning to landscapes that shaped his understanding of what humans can endure. He knows these mountains, these fjords, these patterns of weather and light. They represent the training ground where he learned the skills that would carry him to both poles. The final leg of their journey takes them across the Barents Sea toward Svalbard, where the mining settlement of Ny-Ålesund waits like a tiny outpost of civilization at the edge of the habitable world. Below them, ice flows drift in patterns that change with every tide, creating a constantly shifting mosaic of white and dark water. The Arctic announces itself gradually, in the quality of light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, in the way distances become impossible to judge, in the complete absence of any green thing growing. This is the realm they have come to challenge, a place where the normal rules of survival must be rewritten. As Ny-Ålesund appears on the horizon, a cluster of buildings huddled against the vast indifference of the Arctic landscape, the three men understand that their real journey is only beginning. The Norge has carried them safely across 2,000 miles of Europe, but ahead lies something far more challenging. A flight across the roof of the world where no human has ever traveled, where the margin for error approaches zero, and where success will require everything they have learned about courage, skill, and the careful management of hope. The Norge settles toward the mooring mast with the gentle precision of a bird returning to its nest, carrying within her aluminum frame the dreams of men who have chosen to measure themselves against the impossible. And in that choice, perhaps, lies something that speaks to every leader who has ever stood at the edge of the unknown and decided to step forward anyway. Jotursea. Above the Arctic. A silent world. The morning of May 11th, 1926, arrives with the kind of crystalline clarity that seems to exist only at the edges of the world. The Norge rests against her mooring mast like a silver whale tethered to the shore, her envelope rippling gently in the Arctic breeze that carries with it the scent of snow and possibility. Around her, the final preparations unfold with the quiet intensity you might recognize, the same focused energy that fills your office in those crucial hours before a product launch, when every detail matters and there's no room for second thoughts. Amundsen moves through these final checks with the methodical precision of a man who has learned that in the Arctic, carelessness and death are often separated by the thinnest of margins. His weathered hands trace the guy lines, his eyes scanning the horizon where ice meets sky in an endless conversation of white and blue. At 64, he carries within his frame the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent pushing against the boundaries of the possible. And perhaps something else, something harder to name. The weight of knowing that this may be his final great gesture, his last chance to write his name across the unmarked spaces of the map. Ellsworth stands apart, his American pragmatism wrestling with something approaching awe. The millions he has invested in this moment represent more than money. They represent a kind of faith that some things matter more than profit margins and quarterly returns. In the Arctic light, his face shows the particular expression of a man who has discovered that true adventure cannot be purchased, only earned through the willingness to risk everything you've built for something you cannot yet name. And Noble moves around his airship like a conductor preparing for a symphony. Every adjustment to the gas cells and engine settings, a note in a composition that must be played perfectly on the first attempt. His hands, small and precise, carry the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime spent understanding how to make the impossible merely improbable. The Norge is his creation, his vision made manifest in aluminum and hydrogen. And in her success or failure lies not just the fate of the expedition, but the vindication of everything he believes about the marriage of human ambition and technical mastery. At 8:55 in the morning, The mooring lines fall away. The Norge rises into the Arctic air with a grace that seems to defy her massive size, her 348-foot length casting a shadow across the settlement below like a promise being kept. The three engines settle into their steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that will carry them across 700 miles of the most unforgiving landscape on Earth. Below them, Ny-Ålesund shrinks to a collection of dots against the white, then disappears entirely, leaving them suspended between the ice and the infinite blue dome of the polar sky. What follows is a kind of flying that no longer exists in our world of pressurized cabins and predetermined flight paths. This is flying as pure experience, the constant awareness of the elements, the intimate knowledge of wind and weather, the way the airship responds to every shift in temperature and atmospheric pressure like a living thing. The gondola sways gently beneath the great envelope, and through its windows, the three men watch the Arctic reveal itself in all its terrible beauty. The ice fields stretch away beneath them in patterns that speak to something deeper than geography. Here, massive floes drift in slow-motion collisions that have been playing out for millennia, creating pressure ridges that rise like frozen mountain ranges from the surface of the sea. There, leads of dark water snake between the ice like veins in marble, their surfaces reflecting the sky in shades of blue, so deep they seem to hold their own gravity. The silence up here is unlike anything you have ever experienced. It is not merely the absence of sound, but something more profound. A kind of cosmic quiet that seems to press against the walls of consciousness itself. The engine noise, which seemed so prominent during takeoff, now becomes simply part of the greater symphony of flight. The whisper of wind across the envelope, the gentle creaking of the gondola's framework, the almost subliminal hum of the wireless equipment that represents their only connection to the world they have left behind. Amundsen finds himself drawn again and again to the windows, his experienced eye reading the ice like a text written in a language few humans have ever learned. He knows these patterns, the way the floes break and reform, the subtle signs that indicate whether the ice beneath them is solid or treacherous. This knowledge, earned through decades of polar exploration, now serves him in a new medium, no longer traveling across the ice, but above it, seeing for the first time the vast patterns that are invisible from the surface. But knowledge brings its own burden. Every mile they fly takes them further from any possibility of rescue, deeper into a realm where human error or mechanical failure means not inconvenience, but death. The weight of this responsibility, the knowledge that 16 souls depend on the decisions made in this gondola, settles across his shoulders like a familiar coat. It is the same weight you carry when you sign the front of the paychecks instead of the back. The understanding that leadership means being responsible not just for success, but for the consequences of failure. Ellsworth watches the landscape pass below with the wonder of a man seeing something that money cannot buy and influence cannot command. The millions he has spent to make this moment possible seem suddenly insignificant compared to the privilege of witnessing the Earth from this perspective, of being among the first humans to see the Arctic not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a realm to be experienced in its own terms. Yet even wonder carries its shadows. The personal costs of this expedition extend far beyond the financial investment. Relationships strained by his obsession with exploration, family gatherings missed, business opportunities set aside, the gradual recognition among his peers that Lincoln Ellsworth has chosen adventure over the comfortable predictability of inherited wealth. In the reflection of the gondola window, he sees not just the Arctic landscape, but the face of a man who has discovered that some hungers cannot be satisfied by anything the conventional world has to offer. Nobile divides his attention between the instruments and the performance of his creation, reading in the Norge's behavior a story of engineering triumph and human ambition made manifest. Every hour of flight validates years of calculation and design. The way the envelope maintains its shape in the Arctic air, how the engines respond to the changing atmospheric conditions, the delicate balance of lift and weight that keeps them suspended between earth and sky. But engineering excellence brings its own anxieties. He knows, with the precise understanding that comes from having designed every system aboard the Norge, exactly how many things must continue to work perfectly for them to complete their mission and return safely. The redundancies built into the airship's systems provide some comfort, but not complete peace, for he also knows that the Arctic has a way of finding the one failure mode that no engineer anticipated. The hours pass in a rhythm unlike anything in the modern world, measured not by the artificial divisions of clocks and calendars, but by the gradual changes in the landscape below and the steady consumption of fuel that marks their progress toward a point on the map that exists more as an idea than a place. The North Pole, that mathematical abstraction that has drawn explorers to their deaths for centuries, that represents humanity's need to impose meaning on the vast indifference of the natural world. As they fly deeper into the Arctic, the landscape below begins to change in subtle ways. The ice becomes more chaotic, the leads of open water more frequent, signs that they are approaching the center of the Arctic Ocean, where the ice never stops moving, never achieves the temporary stability found closer to land. This is ice in its purest form, not the frozen lakes and rivers of temperate climates, but something altogether more primal, more alive in its constant motion and reformation. The light up here possesses a quality that seems to exist nowhere else on Earth. A clarity so pure it makes distant objects appear close enough to touch, while simultaneously revealing the true immensity of the landscape they are crossing. Colors that have no names in temperate vocabularies play across the ice. Subtle blues and purples and greens that speak to the complex interaction of light and crystal, of atmosphere and reflection. And through it all, the Norge flies on. A triumph of human ingenuity suspended in a realm that remains fundamentally inhuman, carrying three men whose different motivations have converged on this single point of audacious ambition. In their willingness to risk everything for something that cannot be quantified in conventional terms, they embody something essential about the nature of leadership itself, the recognition that some achievements require not just competence and resources, but the courage to venture beyond the boundaries of the known world. The rhythm of the airship, life aboard the Norge, the courage to venture beyond known boundaries. But what happens when those boundaries close in around you? When the vast expanse of possibility becomes the intimate reality of survival, measured not in grand gestures, but in the quiet rhythms of endurance. Aboard the Norge, life contracts to the essential. 16 men sharing a space barely larger than a railway carriage, suspended beneath the envelope of gas and fabric, carried forward by engines that never sleep. The romance of exploration, so vivid in the planning stages, transforms into something more fundamental. The ancient human challenge of living together under pressure, of maintaining purpose when stripped down to basics. The sleeping arrangements tell their own story of hierarchy and human nature. Amundsen, Ellsworth, and Noble each claim small sections of the control car, spaces barely wide enough for a man to lie down, separated by thin canvas screens that offer the illusion of privacy while revealing every whispered conversation, every restless turn. The remaining crew members make do with whatever space they can find. Curled against instrument panels, stretched out on the narrow walkways, heads pillowed on coils of rope. Sleep comes in fragments, if it comes at all. The engines maintain their relentless rhythm, a deep, thrumming heartbeat that penetrates bone and sinew, making true rest nearly impossible. Some men find the sound oddly comforting after the first day or two, like sleeping beside a great waterfall. Others grow increasingly agitated, their nerves frayed by the constant vibration that seems to loosen not just the rivets in the airship's frame, but something essential in their own composure. Oscar Wisting, Amundsen's longtime companion and perhaps the most experienced polar explorer aboard, after Amundsen himself, moves through the cramped quarters with the quiet efficiency of a man who has learned to find peace in the most hostile environments. He checks instruments, adjusts equipment, offers quiet words to younger crew members struggling with the claustrophobia. His presence a steadying influence when tensions begin to surface. And tensions do surface, as they must, when strong-willed individuals are compressed into such intimate proximity. The initial euphoria of departure gives way to the grinding reality of coexistence. Small irritations become magnified. The way Noble obsessively checks and rechecks his instruments, the particular manner in which Ellsworth clears his throat before speaking, Amundsen's habit of standing motionless for long periods, staring out at the ice below with an expression that reveals nothing of his thoughts. The meals, such as they are, become focal points of the day. Brief moments when the crew gathers in something approaching normalcy. Tinned meat, hardtack, coffee that grows progressively weaker as their supplies stretch to cover the journey. The men eat standing up, balancing their portions against the gentle swaying of the airship, conversation muted by the ever-present engine noise and the strange acoustics of their fabric-walled world. Navigation requires constant attention, a delicate dance between dead reckoning and the few instruments available to them in 1926. The magnetic compass becomes unreliable as they approach the magnetic pole, forcing them to rely increasingly on celestial navigation when the sun breaks through the Arctic overcast. Nobile and his Italian crew members demonstrate their technical mastery, but their methods sometimes clash with the more intuitive approach favored by Amundsen and the Norwegian contingent. These are not merely technical disagreements. They reflect deeper philosophical differences about leadership, about the balance between innovation and proven methods, about who ultimately bears responsibility for the lives aboard this fragile craft. Nobile, brilliant, and meticulous, believes in the supremacy of engineering and careful calculation. Amundsen, shaped by decades of polar experience, trusts instinct honed by survival in places where instruments fail and only judgment matters. Ellsworth finds himself caught between these approaches, his financial backing giving him influence, but his relative inexperience limiting his ability to arbitrate technical disputes. He watches the subtle power struggles play out in the cramped confines of the control car, recognizing patterns that any leader of complex organizations would find familiar. The tension between expertise and authority, between innovation and tradition, between individual brilliance and collective success. The radio equipment, when atmospheric conditions permit, provides their only link to the world they've left behind. Brief, crackling transmissions that confirm their position, report their progress, maintain the illusion of connection to civilization. But these communications also serve as reminders of how utterly alone they are. Voices from another world, speaking across distances that seem to grow more profound with each passing hour. The psychological challenge proves as demanding as any technical obstacle. The human mind, evolved for terrestrial environments and social structures, struggles to adapt to this suspended existence. Some crew members become withdrawn, lost in private thoughts that may be melancholy or transcendent. It becomes impossible to tell the difference. Others grow talkative, filling the mechanical drone with stories and observations that range from profound to trivial, all serving the same essential function of asserting human presence against the vast indifference surrounding them. The landscape below offers little comfort to troubled thoughts. The Arctic ice stretches endlessly in all directions, broken by leads of dark water that snake across the white expanse like cracks in ancient porcelain. Occasionally they spot the tracks of polar bears, those solitary wanderers who somehow thrive in this desolation. But mostly there is nothing. Just the terrible, beautiful emptiness that reduces human ambition to its proper scale. Amundsen spends hours studying this landscape, perhaps seeing in it reflections of his own inner geography. He has conquered the South Pole, navigated the Northwest Passage, achieved everything a polar explorer might dream of achieving, yet something drives him still toward these empty places, as if he finds in their silence an answer to questions he cannot articulate in the warm, complicated world of civilization. The weight of leadership becomes more apparent as the hours accumulate. Each man carries responsibility not just for his own survival, but for the success of an enterprise that has captured the world's attention. They are flying representatives of human aspiration, and failure would mean more than personal disappointment. It would represent a setback for the entire project of pushing against natural boundaries. This knowledge creates its own form of pressure, subtle but persistent. Every decision, from course corrections to fuel consumption, carries implications that extend far beyond the immediate moment. The leaders must project confidence while privately calculating risks, must maintain morale while honestly assessing their situation, must balance optimism with the hard realities of polar aviation in an era when such flights exist at the very edge of possibility. The engines continue their hypnotic rhythm, marking time in a place where conventional measures of time seem inadequate. Day and night blend together under the Arctic sun, creating a temporal suspension that mirrors their physical suspension between earth and sky. The men develop new rhythms, new ways of marking progress and maintaining purpose when surrounded by such overwhelming constancy. In these intimate quarters, leadership reveals itself not in grand pronouncements, but in small gestures. The way Wisting quietly redistributes tasks to help struggling crew members, how Nobile explains technical details with patience that masks his own anxiety, the manner in which Amundsen's very presence seems to anchor the enterprise even when he says nothing at all. The Norge becomes a laboratory for human nature under extreme conditions, a test not just of technology and navigation, but of the social bonds that hold ambitious enterprises together. Every successful venture you've ever led, every team you've built, every moment when individual egos had to surrender to collective purpose. These universal challenges of leadership play out in the most dramatic possible setting, where the stakes could not be higher and the margin for error approaches zero. And through it all, the steady rhythm of the engines, carrying them forward into the unknown, one revolution at a time. A glimpse of the unknown, navigation and discovery, one revolution at a time. And with each turn of those propellers, the Norge carries her crew deeper into a realm where the familiar rules of navigation begin to dissolve. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when you're leading your team into genuinely uncharted territory, when the old playbooks no longer apply, and you must rely on instruments both mechanical and intuitive to find your way forward. The weight you carry in those moments, it's not unlike what Amundsen feels as he hunches over his charts, trying to reconcile the theoretical with the reality unfolding beneath them. The Arctic plays tricks on navigators. What appears to be solid ground reveals itself as shadow on ice. What seems like a mountain range dissolves into cloud formations. The magnetic compass, that most trusted of instruments, grows increasingly unreliable as they approach the magnetic pole, spinning lazily, offering suggestions rather than certainties. Nobile watches his instruments with the focused intensity you might recognize from your own crucial moments, when everything depends on reading the signals correctly. The altimeter, the speed indicator, the fuel gauges that tick steadily downward, marking not just distance traveled, but time remaining in this impossible place. "Bearing?" Amundsen calls out, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. The navigator squints through his instruments, calculating their position against the sun's angle, against the wind drift, against the endless variables that accumulate when you're traveling at 70 miles per hour over a landscape that offers no landmarks, no reference points, no forgiveness for miscalculation. This is navigation stripped to its essence. No GPS satellites, no radio beacons, just men with sextants and chronometers, dead reckoning their way across the top of the world, carrying the hopes of nations and the weight of their own ambitions. But then, moments of pure wonder break through the technical concentration. A movement below catches someone's eye. There, impossibly far from any imagined habitat, a polar bear picks its way across the ice. Solitary, magnificent, utterly unconcerned with the mechanical intrusion passing overhead. The bear pauses, looks up briefly at the strange shadow crossing its domain, then continues on its ancient path. There's something profoundly humbling about this encounter, this reminder that they are visitors here, temporary passengers through a realm that belongs to creatures far better adapted to its harsh realities. Ellsworth points toward the horizon, where the ice has buckled and twisted into fantastic formations. Pressure ridges stretch like the spine of some sleeping giant, where competing ice sheets have collided with forces that dwarf human engineering. The resulting chaos creates a landscape that seems almost architectural, as if some cosmic designer had experimented with forms too grand for terrestrial minds to fully comprehend. These are the moments that make the risk worthwhile, aren't they? When what you're building, what you're reaching for, reveals glimpses of beauty that justify the sleepless nights and the weight you carry. When the unknown stops being merely a source of anxiety and becomes a source of genuine wonder. The light here defies description. With the sun hanging low on the horizon, neither fully rising nor setting, the ice below takes on colors that seem impossible. Blues deeper than ocean trenches. Whites so pure they seem to generate their own illumination. Shadows that stretch for miles, creating texture and depth across what first appeared to be a featureless plain. But beneath the wonder, the unspoken anxieties pulse with the rhythm of the engines. Each man aboard carries his own private catalogue of fears. Not the obvious ones, not the dramatic scenarios of engine failure or structural collapse. Those risks they've calculated and accepted. It's the subtler terrors that gnaw at the edges of consciousness. The fear of miscalculation, of discovering too late that their fuel estimates were optimistic, of finding that the weather ahead has closed off their planned route to Alaska, leaving them with impossible choices. Amundsen feels the weight of reputation, of being the man others look to for decisions that could mean the difference between triumph and tragedy. Every choice he makes ripples through the crew, affecting not just their immediate safety, but the very possibility of return. Nobile carries the burden of technical responsibility. These are his engines, his calculations, his design keeping them aloft over terrain where a forced landing means, well, where a forced landing simply cannot be contemplated. The mathematics of their situation allow no margin for mechanical failure. And Ellsworth, he bears perhaps the heaviest load of all. The financial architect of this venture, he knows that his resources, his backing, his faith in these men has brought them to this point of maximum exposure. Success will validate his vision. Failure will carry a price measured not just in dollars, but in lives. The landscape below tells stories of forces beyond human scale. Here, a lead of open water cuts through the ice like a dark river, steam rising from its surface in the frigid air, creating its own weather system in miniature. The water appears almost black against the surrounding white, a reminder that beneath this frozen surface lies an ocean 2 miles deep, cold and dark and utterly indifferent to human ambition. There, the ice has formed into perfect geometric patterns, polygons that stretch to the horizon with mathematical precision, as if nature were demonstrating principles of crystallography on a continental scale. The regular shapes create an optical illusion of order imposed on chaos, though everyone aboard understands that the true relationship runs in the opposite direction. Wildlife appears in unexpected moments. A seal surfaces in that distant lead, visible for just an instant before disappearing back into the dark water. Arctic foxes, their white coats making them nearly invisible against the snow, leave tracks that form the only evidence of their passage across this frozen desert. Most remarkable of all, the complete absence of any human presence. No settlements, no smoke columns, no paths or roads, or any indication that their species has ever touched this place. It's a perspective that few humans have ever experienced. This view of Earth, as it existed for millennia before civilization began its restless expansion. The silence, when they shut down one engine for routine checks, carries a quality unlike anything they've ever experienced. Not merely the absence of sound, but something deeper. A silence so complete it seems to have weight and texture. In that brief moment, they hear only the wind across the ice and the whisper of their own passage through air so cold and thin it barely seems substantial. But the engine restarts, and the familiar rhythm returns, carrying them forward across this landscape that exists at the very edge of the possible. Navigation here requires a different kind of precision than any of them have known. Not just the technical skill of reading instruments and calculating positions, but the deeper navigation of managing fear, of maintaining focus when the magnitude of their isolation threatens to overwhelm rational thought. They are 16 men in a fabric envelope, suspended by hydrogen and hope above a realm that offers no second chances. Every decision must be correct the first time. Every calculation must account for variables that textbooks never contemplated. And yet, they continue forward. Not because the risks have diminished, but because this is what explorers do, what leaders do, what anyone does who chooses to push beyond the boundaries of the known and comfortable. The weight you carry in your own ventures, it's not so different, is it? The responsibility for others who have placed their trust in your vision. The knowledge that your decisions ripple outward in ways you cannot fully predict or control. The understanding that leadership, at its core, is about navigation through uncertainty. 1 degree off course here, in this place, compounds into hundreds of miles of error. But 1 degree of doubt, 1 moment of hesitation when decisive action is required, that can prove equally catastrophic in any venture worth pursuing. So they fly on, these 16 men, reading their instruments and watching the endless ice. carrying their hopes and fears and the dreams of nations across the top of a world that remains, even now, fundamentally unknown. Reaching the pole, a moment in history. The ice below begins to change as they approach their destination. What was once a chaotic jumble of pressure ridges and broken flows gradually gives way to something more uniform, more eternal. The landscape beneath the Norge transforms into an almost perfect white canvas, stretching without interruption toward every horizon. This is the ice of the deep Arctic, ice that has known no footstep, no shadow save that of clouds, and the occasional bird blown impossibly far from any shore. It lies in vast, unbroken sheets, sculpted by winds that have circled the top of the world for millennia, without obstruction. Amundsen stands at the forward observation window, his weathered hands pressed against the glass. For all his years of polar exploration, for all the ice he has crossed and conquered, this sight still moves something deep within him. The purity of it, the absolute mathematical perfection of this white geometry spreading below. Behind him, Nobile checks and rechecks their position. The calculations that have consumed him for hours now point toward a convergence, toward a place that exists more as an idea than a physical location. A point where all the meridians of the earth meet, where every direction becomes south, where the very concept of navigation transforms into something almost philosophical. You know this feeling, don't you? This moment when all the preparation, all the sleepless nights and careful planning, all the weight you've carried for months or years, when it all begins to crystallize into something real, something you can almost touch. The Norge flies steadily northward, her engines maintaining their rhythmic pulse. 16 men aboard, each carrying their own understanding of what this moment means. For Ellsworth, it represents the vindication of his vision, proof that audacity, properly funded and executed, can indeed reshape the possible. For Noble, it is the triumph of engineering over impossibility, the validation of calculations made in the safety of workshops now tested against the most unforgiving environment on Earth. And for Amundsen, for him, it is something deeper. The completion of a journey that began decades ago in the mountains of Norway, when a young man decided that the blank spaces on maps were not barriers, but invitations. The radio operator adjusts his equipment, preparing to send word to the world. But for now, in these final moments of approach, there is only the sound of engines and the whisper of wind over fabric, and the profound silence of the ice below. Nobile calls out their position. They are close now, very close. The ice beneath them shows no recognition of their approach, no acknowledgement that they are nearing one of the most significant points on Earth. It simply continues, white and endless and magnificent in its indifference. This is how the world responds to human ambition, isn't it? With neither encouragement nor discouragement, but with the simple, eternal presence of what is, and then, there. Nobile's voice cuts through the engine noise with quiet precision. They have reached it. 90 degrees north latitude, the mathematical apex of the planet. The Norge flies over the North Pole. There is no monument here, no marker to indicate the significance of this invisible point. Only ice stretching away in every direction, identical to the ice they have been flying over for hours. Yet everything has changed. They have done what no airship has done before. They have carried the dreams of 3 nations and the hopes of an age to the very top of the world. Amundsen moves to the small hatch they have prepared for this moment. His hands, steady despite everything they have endured to reach this place, hold the flags they have carried across thousands of miles, the colors of Norway, the United States, and Italy, bound together by string and weighted with small metal pieces. The hatch opens, and the Arctic wind rushes in, air that has never known the warmth of any continent, air that has circled this point for countless centuries without touching human skin. One by one, the flags fall toward the ice below. They flutter in the thin air, these small pieces of fabric carrying the weight of nations before disappearing against the white expanse. Somewhere on that ice, they will come to rest. The first human artifacts to mark this place, though the wind will soon cover them, and the ice will claim them, and in time, no trace will remain. But the moment will endure. This is what you're building toward, isn't it? Not the monuments or the recognition, not the flags or the fanfare, but these moments when vision becomes reality, when the impossible reveals itself to have been merely improbable, when the weight you carry transforms from burden into achievement. The Norge continues her flight, passing over the pole and beginning the long journey toward Alaska. Behind them lies the achievement. Ahead, the proof that they can complete what they began. But here, in this moment, suspended between departure and arrival, between dream and fulfillment, there is something approaching peace. Ellsworth writes in his journal, trying to capture what cannot quite be captured. Nobile adjusts their course for the next phase of their journey. Amundsen returns to his observation post, watching the ice that now lies behind them. Ice that will never again be quite as unknown as it was an hour ago. The radio operator sends their message to the world. In newsrooms and government offices, on street corners and in drawing rooms, people will soon learn that the Norge has succeeded. That three men with vastly different backgrounds and motivations have managed to align their purposes long enough to achieve something unprecedented. But that knowledge belongs to the future. Here, now, there is only the steady flight of the airship and the profound satisfaction that comes from having carried a vision to its completion, from having refused to let the weight of responsibility become an excuse for inaction. The ice stretches endlessly ahead, white and patient and eternal. And the Norge flies on, carrying her crew toward the next chapter of their story, toward the proof that reaching the impossible is only meaningful if you can find your way home. Homeward bound, a gentle descent. The ice begins to change beneath them as they continue their passage toward Alaska. No longer the pristine, untouched white of the polar cap, but something more varied, more textured. Here the frozen ocean shows the scars of winter storms, pressure ridges where great sheets of ice have collided and thrust upward like the spine of some sleeping leviathan. The Norge flies steadily onward, her engines maintaining their reassuring rhythm, carrying 16 men who have touched the very top of the world and now seek the comfort of solid ground. In the cramped gondola, you can see the subtle shift in the crew's demeanor. The intense focus of the approach to the pole has given way to something quieter, a deep weariness mixed with profound satisfaction. These men have carried an impossible dream from the drawing boards of Europe to the most remote point on Earth. They have proven that with enough determination, enough careful planning, enough willingness to bear the weight of uncertainty, even the North Pole yields to human ambition. Amundsen stands at the observation window, his weathered face reflecting decades of Arctic experience. For him, this flight represents something approaching completion. The final chapter in a lifetime spent pushing against the boundaries of the known world. the weight he has carried for so long, the responsibility of leadership, the burden of other men's lives, the constant pressure to prove that the impossible is merely the untried. All of it has led to this moment of quiet vindication. The landscape below continues to evolve as they fly southeast toward the Alaskan coast. The ice becomes more broken, more dynamic. Here and there, leads of dark water snake between the floes like veins of shadow. The Arctic Ocean is beginning to show its true character. Not the static, frozen wasteland that maps suggest, but a living system of ice and current and wind, constantly reshaping itself according to forces beyond human understanding. Ellsworth moves through the gondola with the careful satisfaction of a man whose vision has been validated. The weight of financing this expedition, of believing in something that existed only in the imagination of a few determined men, has transformed into something tangible, something real. The Norge herself is proof that audacious dreams, properly funded and expertly executed, can reshape the possible. What seemed like folly in the comfortable offices of New York has become historic achievement in the unforgiving reality of the Arctic. The hours pass with the steady drone of engines and the subtle creaking of the airship's frame. Time moves differently here, measured not in the frantic urgency of deadlines and obligations, but in the patient rhythm of mechanical systems and the slow progression of landmarks far below. There is something deeply restoring about this pace, this reminder that the most important journeys cannot be rushed, cannot be compressed into the artificial urgency of modern life. Nobile monitors his instruments with the quiet pride of an engineer whose creation has exceeded all expectations. The Norge has carried them further than any airship has ever flown, has maintained her integrity in conditions that would destroy lesser vessels, has proven that Italian engineering and Arctic exploration make powerful partners. The weight of technical responsibility, of ensuring that every system functions perfectly when failure means death, has been carried successfully to this point. His airship has become part of history. As they approach the Alaskan coast, the ice gives way to something even more remarkable. The first glimpse of land in days of flying over frozen ocean. Dark mountains rise from the white expanse like ancient sentinels, their peaks catching the Arctic light and throwing it back in shades of purple and gold. After the endless uniformity of the ice cap, this varied landscape feels almost overwhelming in its complexity and beauty. The crew prepares for the final phase of their journey with the methodical care of men who understand that success is not complete until everyone returns safely home. Radio equipment is checked, navigation instruments verified, landing procedures reviewed one final time. They have proven that the North Pole can be reached by air, but now they must prove that such an achievement means nothing without the ability to return and share what they have learned. Below them, the Alaskan wilderness stretches in all directions. Vast forests and frozen rivers and mountains that have stood unchanged since long before human ambition ever dreamed of flight. There is something humbling about this perspective, this reminder that even the most audacious human achievements take place against a backdrop of geological time and natural forces that dwarf our greatest accomplishments. The settlement of Teller appears ahead like a small cluster of civilization carved from the wilderness. Smoke rising from chimneys, the geometric patterns of human habitation standing in sharp contrast to the organic curves of the landscape. After days of flying over emptiness, the sight of this small community feels like a beacon of warmth and welcome and human connection. The Norge begins her descent toward the prepared landing area, her crew working with the practiced efficiency of men who have learned to trust each other completely. 16 individuals have become something more than the sum of their parts, have become a team capable of achieving what no team has achieved before. The weight they have carried together has made them stronger than any of them could have been alone. The landing is gentle, almost anticlimactic after the drama of their polar passage. The Norge settles onto the Alaskan ground with the satisfied sigh of a great ship reaching port after a long voyage. Ground crews rush forward to secure the airship. Local officials and journalists gather to document this historic arrival. But for the crew, there is mainly relief and the deep satisfaction that comes from having carried a vision to its completion. As the engines finally fall silent, the absence of their constant drone feels almost startling. For days, that mechanical rhythm has been the soundtrack of their journey, the reassuring proof that their systems continued to function, that their passage through the impossible remained possible. Now, in the sudden quiet, they can hear the wind across the Alaskan tundra and the voices of people who have gathered to welcome them home. What they have accomplished will echo through history, will inspire future generations of explorers and dreamers and leaders who face their own impossible challenges. The Norge expedition has proven that with enough determination, enough careful planning, enough willingness to carry the weight of uncertainty and responsibility, even the most audacious dreams can become reality. But perhaps the most important lesson of their journey lies not in the achievement itself, but in the reminder that every great accomplishment begins with someone willing to bear the weight of an impossible vision. Someone willing to transform the phrase, "It cannot be done," into the question, "How might we do it?" Someone willing to carry that burden from conception through completion, no matter how heavy it becomes along the way. The Arctic keeps its secrets still. Vast expanses of ice and snow and silence that have witnessed the passage of the Norge, but remain fundamentally unchanged by human ambition. Patient and eternal and beautiful in their indifference to our need for achievement and recognition, and proof that we matter in the vast scheme of things, and as the crew of the Norge finally steps onto solid ground after their unprecedented journey, they carry with them not just the satisfaction of having reached the North Pole, but the deeper understanding that the weight we bear in pursuit of our impossible dreams is not a burden to be endured, but a privilege to be embraced. The proof that we are alive and striving and worthy of the visions that call us forward into the unknown territories of what we might become.